Welcome to another episode of the MacGuffin Podcast, the movie review podcast that dreams are made of. Keith Foster, happy Halloween.
That's right. You are Cassidy Robinson, and a happy Hallows Eve to you as well.
We're technically recording this before the Halloween weekend, but this should be coming out the Monday after. And the review...
I feel like Halloween season, though, in general, in the last 5 years, has been expanding further and further into September. I feel like Halloween used to just be a month, and maybe this is just how I celebrate, but I don't know. I feel like I start getting the itch for the spookies, around early September, and then it starts to kind of die off until the last week and a half of October, and then it's boom, back.
Truth be told, I have not been feeling the reason for the season lately. As far as Halloweens go, I haven't been going out of my way to consume as much Halloween or horror media outside of the stuff we do for the podcast than I usually do. But it's starting to hit a little bit. But generally speaking, on my off time, I watched Practical Magic for the first time just because I was what the fuck?
I mean, okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, and I've seen some cool stuff, and we've talked about some cool stuff here on the podcast too, so it's been doing the job as well.
If you want something real fun, check out Mike Flanagan's new series on Netflix, Fall of the House of Usher.
Right, which that just came out a little while ago.
Yeah, it's properly creepy. I think it is my favorite Flanagan series so far.
Right.
It's creepy without being too scary, and it's just very addictive, so you can binge it. And, it's a one single-use thing. It's only 8 episodes, and that's it. It's just a mini-series. And once it's done, it's done. But, check that out and see if that doesn't help rouse the demons.
Well, we don't have to go that far. But on this episode, we're going to be reviewing Martin Scorsese's new film, Killers of the Flower Moon. And for the last horror-themed streaming homework, friend of the show, Ted Bonman, had us review One Cut of the Dead, which is streaming exclusively on Shudder right now. The Japanese zombie film of sorts. And we'll get in the ins and outs of that.
Yeah.
But again, just as a brain teaser, just to get the neurons firing, we're going to do it again. We're going to play another game of Fuck, Marry, Kill. Movie Monster Worms.
Okay.
We have the Graboids from the movie Tremors. We have the sandworms from Beetlejuice that are from the moons of Saturn, I believe. And we have Shai-Hulud, the psychic sandworm in Dune.
Woo! Okay, this is a challenging one. All right, I'm going to say fuck Shai-Hulud, because it just looks like a giant butthole, right?
Those could be teeth. They don't really say. There's been lots of designs, by the way, and I was struggling on which one I was going to feature. Would I go with the David Lynch one, or the ones from the book covers?
They're pretty. I mean, they share a common theme, though, of being a giant sandworm. I do feel the Denis Villeneuve design looks the most like a big ol' 30-foot brown eye. So I'm gonna say fuck that one.
Okay.
Marry the sandworms of Saturn, because they have some nice aesthetic qualities. I feel like, you could design a house with this giant worm. It's artsy. It might be bipolar, based off the two-headedness of it. But I just feel like it seems the easiest to domesticate and kill the graboids from Tremors, because I think it looks the most like a real gross bug.
Yeah. I think my order is exactly the same, although for different reasons. I want to kill the graboid because you got those like snake tongues with the horns.
Yeah, they're pretty nasty.
Yeah, they're gonna, just coil you in and devour you. And yeah, I mean, I don't even like totally understand the anatomy of it. It's
See, that's the one that I feel like I technically understand the anatomy the most of. Like I feel like it seems the most like a real fucking gross ass creature.
Yeah. But it seems the most dangerous, and like there's no bargaining with it.
I know, you're all about survival.
Well, that is how the game is played for me. I'm gonna marry the sandworms of Saturn from Beetlejuice, mostly because of the one scene near the end of the film where Gina Davis rides in on it, which that assumes some sort of ability to cooperate with it and have some sort of partnership.
What I'm saying. I feel like it's the easiest to domesticate. It is of all of these giant worms. I also feel like it's the smallest. Yeah,
probably. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how long it is, but it's certainly the skinniest. You can get your legs around it. And I'm going to, in air quotes, fuck Shai-Hulud. I mean, I don't think you possibly could. It's just enormous. It's like it's like trying to have sex with a skyscraper or something.
I mean, you could jerk off while riding it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you could do that with anything. I think more so specifically, I'm thinking it has the powers of the spice. It is psychic, and it has the most ability to sort of communicate and understand humans. So
it's definitely the most intelligent.
I think whatever sort of copulation you were to create with Shai-Hulud, it would be more something in the mind and breathing in weird spice and having some sort of like drug fueled, crazy fantasy sex. But
yeah, you've almost convinced me that this is team marriage, though, because I think that it is the most intelligent. It would be the most. It's the most capable of communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the least amount of dumb animal.
Yeah, I mean, it's technically in their culture a god, basically.
Yeah. You might have changed my mind on this.
Heard it here first. Shai-Hulud is marriage potential.
Yeah, I think I'm obviously still kill the graboid. Like we were both in agreement there. Yeah. Maybe fuck the sandworm of Saturn or let it fuck me. I don't know how sandworms go. And then I think I might marry Shai-Hulud.
All right. With that,
what a transition.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and start talking about Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. I saw over the weekend. I assume you probably did too.
I think I saw it on Sunday.
One of the most anticipated films of the year. A lot of press going into it, coming out of it, surrounding it. Do you want me to set it up? I can if you like.
Sure.
So essentially, this takes place in the early turn of the century, between the 19th, 20th century, in Oklahoma.
I think it's post World War One, right? Because Leonardo DiCaprio's character, I think, is a veteran of World War One.
Yes, but there's a bit of a prologue to that as well.
Yeah.
So, it kind of gives you context of everything that's going on in this community. But
it does take place over what feels like a significant amount of time. It's not just
right.
Like a weekend.
25, 30-year period of time that the story spans. But originally, what we see in the prologue is that the Osage Nation, the natives were driven out of different places in America. I think at one point they were in Kansas. And as the European settlers start to take over more and more land, building across the nation, Manifest Destiny, all of that, they eventually settle on this arid desert landscape, sort of grassy Oklahoma land, where there's
seemingly nothing.
Yeah, where they feel like they can really sort of flourish and be unencumbered by settlers until they discover a giant reservoir of oil underneath them, which begins this saga where the Osage Nation, and it's this really kind of fascinating thing of history that I wasn't aware of, but for some time were very, very wealthy because they had access and their lineage directly connected to these oil reserves. Mm-hmm. And the way that their culture works, the fortunes run through the women.
Where these individual families have head rights to, a specific amount of this oil money.
Yeah, depending on where their land is and how much oil they have access to.
And they are marrying into these families to get access to this oil money.
Yes, and we first meet Leonardo DiCaprio. Like you said, he just came home from the war. He's a little rattled. As far as characters go, he's not too bright. So he moves into this area to work underneath his uncle, who's played by Robert De Niro. And his uncle has ingratiated himself upon this area by funding housing and schools and things like that, and sort of modernizing the area so that he can bring in more and more white settlers and colonizers to marry into these families and create a pipeline directly to him to create a means to wealth. And what ends up happening is that he calls upon all of these guys who are sort of playing second fiddle in their family to marry into money, and then one by one, there starts to be this string of, quote unquote, mysterious deaths where the women of these tribes die of illnesses or die of depression or die of suicide. And Ernest, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, we get this kind of interaction between him and Robert De Niro almost, in the first 10 minutes of the film, where he says, "Hey, how do you like Molly, this girl that they're all sort of aware of, who's close with Robert De Niro and his family. And it's pretty clear that he's suggesting that he marries into her family. And things start to come to a head when her sisters and her mother end up in these tragic events as well. And
Molly is sort of the end of a string of pearls, right? Where all of her family starts dying off to the point where she is set to sort of inherit everything, for Leonardo DiCaprio's character to take that all away and funnel it directly to De Niro.
Right. And, she already has health complications, being a diabetic during a time before there's a lot of medication for that. Like we see like the beginning stages of like insulin being talked about and things like that. Of course, all the doctors are funded by De Niro's character, Hale.
Yeah, the whole community is.
Right.
So all I was going to say is he comes from a different line of money. He has like a cattle ranch where the funds have more of an expiration date than this oil money. So you get the sense that he invested heavily in this community so that later on he would sort of live off of the dividends.
Right, which is his plan going in. And
yeah,
it's an interesting role for him in this movie, particularly because he's the most driven and the most Machiavellian. There's elements of this film that belong to the crime genre. There's elements to this film that belong to the Western, but Scorsese kind of subverts both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he does to sort of subvert the crime genre aspect of it, because you could look at him as sort of a Godfather type with his soldiers that he sends out to do his bidding for, riches or whatever.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that one of the things that's interesting about this movie is, it's Scorsese who has done the crime movie. He's done the definitive version of the crime movie over and over and over again.
Yeah, he's perfected it.
Yeah, and this is a subversion of it because it's unlike other Scorsese movies. It doesn't sort of glamorize the sort of crime world, right? Like none of these guys come away from this looking cool, whereas in Casino and in like Goodfellas and stuff, like there's sort of a cool element to it, like, oh, we figured out the system and we're working around it. But the way this is portrayed is ghoulish and gruesome, and exactly what it is these fucking dipshits exploiting the wealth of a community that exists,
right?
And they look parasitic. The crimes are brutal and unglamorized. It's sort of an inversion of the crime story as we know it, right? Like none of these characters are held up on a pedestal. They look like idiots and just pieces of shit. That get away with things based off of just who they're surrounded by and nobody giving a shit. The fact that so many people die of all of these conveniences and there's no investigation, there's no hint of foul play, even though the way it's portrayed, it seems obvious from the third person's perspective that like
right.
there is a disease and it is these white men in the community.
Well, on one hand, they do know that. I mean, there's a really important scene where the tribal council kind of comes together at once. You know, there's a particularly horrific murder involving a bomb that was placed, and by that point, you can't call anything an accident anymore.
Yeah.
And they decide they're going to travel to Washington, D.C. to try and bring federal investigation into it. And that kind of ends up being what the third act is about. But you get these great conversation of these elders really just, you know, speaking very frankly and very exactly about what's happening in this town, where they call, you know, the white men who have settled there and married into these families vultures, and they're just circling. Yeah. And then, brilliantly, you pan right over to De Niro's character, King Hale, who's sitting there with them, and it's right underneath their nose. Yeah, I'm going to fund this investigation myself, which really, as an audience member, we know he's going to do everything he can to rat fuck it. But they want to believe that he is this benevolent protector, even though I think they know he isn't.
That scene in particular, I think is brilliant. It is shot so well. The acting in it is incredible. Like the way it cuts to De Niro and DiCaprio as it's talking about this parasite upon their community, and they're talking directly to the people that are preying on them. And I wouldn't even say subtly, talking to the audience. Oh, I mean, I agree.
I think that the movie is really holding up a mirror to modern Western culture, and this is one of the best films I've seen that perfectly describes why you can't separate class politics with intersectionality. Like, if you are a class reductionist, where you just think, we don't want to talk about...
If money is the answer, then once you have money, you're fine. You're part of the 1% or whatever, right? But in this case, this is a community of money. They are what you would consider old money. You know, they have been born into these families of oil wealth, but we have this community of white men that the racism is stronger than the classism.
Well, the racism is part of the classism.
Yes.
They're inexorably linked.
Yeah.
Like they are what you can't separate the two. You can't, there are a lot of, talking about sort of the political situation of today, there's a lot of people who want to believe, like, if you just give everyone their just dues, then everything will simmer. But you have to fight it on two spectrums, or two sides: the racism and the class politics, or the corruption of capitalism, are inexorably linked. And this is one of the best movies to, I think, condemn that.
Oh, I agree. And I also think, like, for Scorsese, this is sort of a culmination of an entire body of work that interrogates Americana and the American dream. And this lines up very well with the Wolf of Wall Street, which also lines up with Goodfellas, which also, has this interrogation of history that we've seen before with something like Gangs of New York. Like it feels like sort of the culmination of an entire body of work of looking at this idea of what the American dream is and how attainable it is and who it's attainable for and by.
Sure.
And the violence that comes along with that. And I think this is one of the more overt examples of him directly condemning it and making it obvious that he's condemning it.
Yeah, there's something like it's a bit of an original sin story.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And also it covers the ground, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is interesting about the performances, because I really want to get into that.
Yeah. Okay.
Everybody is, I mean, I think career bests for De Niro and DiCaprio. Again, this is so not the Leo that we usually see. You know, there's nothing cool about him. Like, he's bumbling, like I said, he's dim, he's weak, he's pathetic.
But yes, but he doesn't realize that as a character. And I think that is incredibly difficult to pull off, right? How layered it is he is weak and he is dim and he is sort of always in the disadvantage of every situation he's in, but he thinks he's the smartest and the coolest, and he thinks that he's getting away with this shit, and it is an incredibly nuanced performance from DiCaprio.
Right. Well, as an actor, you have to, even if your character is absolutely despicable and unlikable, you have to play them sympathetically. And I think what he does really well here, specifically in the story between him and Lily Gladstone as Molly, his wife, is he is playing this conflict where he knows what he's doing is wrong, and he knows that what he's doing is murder, but he somehow feels like it doesn't apply to him. Like, their relationship is, for some reason, he has managed to believe that it's different than what he's doing to everyone else.
You can see the justification in his eyes, in his mind, of like, all these other people are doing that, but this is different because I love her.
Yeah.
Like, you see that he has the idea of love. You see that he understands maybe, what love is abstractly. But none of his actions are that of someone who loves someone, right? Like, everything he does is, and he has these moments, these subtle moments where he talks about how he loves nothing more than money, and you see sort of the real guy there. You see where his interests actually align, even though the character is unaware of it. And that is
there's
really incredible.
There's nothing subtle about the messaging here. Even if the performances are subtle.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The messaging isn't subtle at all, but it takes good actors to sell that, right?
Right. Like, yeah. Because you could easily just make him into some, bucktooth racist like mustache twirling villain, and nobody's doing that here.
And I think that is one of the things that is so insidious about this movie is it sets him up to feel like a hero, but every aspect of the story is telling you, no, he is not. He is the villain of this story. He is undercutting every other character at every possible turn. He is he is loathsome, he is vile, but the movie sells you on his own justifications. The movie's viewpoint is manipulating the audience in a way that the story doesn't. And I think that is really cool.
And you have to believe that Lily Gladstone's character could fall in love with him. Well, you know, you have to be convinced of his charm to an extent.
I mean, if we also want to talk about performances, I feel like in the script, she has sort of the least to work with, right? She has kind of the least amount of dialogue. A lot of the time, there is a chunk of the movie where her character is sort of waylaid, and she has to sell everything through her eyes and through her emotions, and through it is such a physical and restrained performance that it is incredible. Like, there's a reason everybody's talking about her for the Oscars already. Like, yeah, it is so nuanced. You can see that she wants to believe in this guy. She wants to believe in her husband, but there's this hesitancy, this doubt, this thing in the back of her mind, and she has to sell all of that through a look.
Yeah, it's this quiet power that she has in every scene where she's doing so much. By the way, we need a GIF on Twitter like yesterday of her telling DiCaprio, "You talk too much."
Yeah, I'm sure it exists, but give me a minute and I can make it.
No, she's fantastic in this movie. This is one of those performances, one of those like immediate star-making performances, where when I saw it, I was like, oh, I must have seen her in something. Like, she's so good. Obviously, she's been around. She's relatively new. She's done some indie, a handful of indie films, some television.
So she's one of those actors that has had a hard time finding, the roles.
Yeah.
And apparently she was considering retiring from acting, and I think getting like her IT credentials or something, and just moving out of the India, similar to KQ Han, who worked forever in the industry, sort of behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden they get this chance to show
what they can do.
Fuck, they are incredible. Yeah. And
she's the linchpin. I mean, she's the soul of this movie.
Absolutely.
If you didn't believe her, or it was somebody who was just giving you less, this would be a very impenetrable movie. But because she is so warm and so effervescent, and again, just this powerful stoicism that you rarely see in performances, I mean, very often at all.
It's incredible how she can hold a scene without saying a word. And it's a scene with Leonardo DiCaprio. You know what I mean?
Or
like
Robert
one
De
of
Niro.
the best actors of our generation, and she can hold her own with no dialogue. She can just sit there and you can feel it, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and Robert De Niro as William Hale, the way he sinks his teeth into pure evil.
Again, this character doesn't think he's evil at all. This character is pragmatic, and it is simply taking advantage of the situation. And to be able to portray that kind of evil with earnestness, without underselling it for the sake of melodrama, that takes fucking talent. Like, he is this poisonous cancer of a person, but everything is justified in his mind. Everything is, he is an Excel spreadsheet of a human, and the numbers make all the justification for his actions that he needs.
There's lots of really, I mean, this movie's stacked with people. Jesse Plemons, of course he shows up. He's like,
yes.
I mean, this movie conjured him. He plays,
and I if Scorsese, if this isn't his last movie, if he keeps making movie, I think he is, of course, a welcome addition to his Scorsese repertoire of actors.
Right. And there's a lot of non-actors in the movie. We talked about the tribunal when they're talking and they're condemning the murders and stuff. A lot of those guys were originally brought onto the film just as consultants to make sure they're getting the history right and their culture stuff right. And then I was watching an interview with Scorsese where he was talking about how they were sort of just talking sort of off the cuff, like, about the movie, like, and they were sort of describing to the other actors how they see what was going on. And it was so compelling to Scorsese that he came back and he told them, can you say all that again? Just, over here. And then, so I don't know if they eventually, scripted that or if that scene was primarily improvised, but goddamn, they were all fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there isn't a weak link in this movie. It is, every performance is top notch. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how you can come out of this movie and not just sort of be floored by it.
I liked it a lot. I liked it a whole lot. I'm feeling very A- on it. And it could even go up, in the coming months.
Sure.
The only thing that I wasn't sure of was a kind of stylistic departure in the epilogue, but now I think it might be brilliant, but I almost need to see it again.
I immediately was like, fuck yes. I was floored by the epilogue. I was like, the immediate summation of these events and the way it is so concisely given this spin that also condemns sort of current pop culture and the way we exploit sort of true crime and sensationalism and murder and all of these salacious things that are very easy to exploit because they, it has a hook, it has a if it bleeds, it leads kind of aspect to it. And this movie does that. It subverts itself. It immediately, by the end of the movie, looks at it and goes, by the way, this is white people commenting on this genocide that has happened for hundreds of years in this country, and it is presented through that same lens. There isn't a real resolution. There isn't a real denouement. It's all presented from this aspect of sensationalism that I jaw on the floor kind of.
Right. I think that's the conclusion I've come to with it. I think initially while I was watching it, I just thought he was trying to think of a more creative way of doing post-credits.
No. Yeah, I can see that. But it was
rather than just having a black card with some text on it.
It was so jarring and deliberate, though.
Yeah.
That I like it calls attention to itself that in a way that I was like, this is a master doing a master work.
Right. Yeah. Fuck it. I'm giving it an A+.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of the movie to beat for me this year. I was like, I got from this what I feel like the rest of the world got out of Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer left me a little cold. And this, I just was like, through the whole thing, like, oh my God, this is fucking brilliant. This is literally Like, how can Martin Scorsese still be peak? But
Right.
he fucking is.
He can still knock it out of the ballpark, just like what De Niro does here. I mean, they're both
exactly
like pushing 80 and doing their best work yet.
Yeah,
get the fuck out of here.
It's like there is just even if you don't agree with anything else we said, there is a joy of seeing masters do master work. There is a joy in seeing these people still able to give it, still able to not phone it in. It's not hacky in any way. It is still like, you know, they all have something to say here. And like, it's just incredible that he's still going. That all of the, you know, him and De Niro and just all of it came together in what feels like a perfect storm in a career of perfect storms.
Yeah, and, you know, we didn't get into it much, but on a technical level, the movie looks great. Shot on film.
Some of the editing in this also is like...
The editing is really, really good. There's some really creative long takes that, you know, Scorsese's really known for, but, you know, there's one in particular where there's a Steadicam shot that goes all throughout this house, and you don't even realize that it's not cutting until you realize it.
And there's these strange elements of surrealism and horror as well, with like the owl and like these scenes of the burning scenes, and just like to me it's just like it works on an artistic level, it works on a narrative level. It's 3.5 hours long, but I honestly didn't feel it. Like I was never bored or like, oh, this needs to wrap up. It uses that runtime efficiently.
The music by Robert E. Robertson. This is his last score. He just recently passed away. He's been a long collaborator with Scorsese, but and he is a native as well. I forget which community he comes from originally, but he's well known in the world of like blues and hard rock and stuff like that. I think they met on The Last Waltz, and he brings some like kind of something sort of modern, but also sort of believably historical as well to the score.
Yeah, there's an authenticity to the score.
Yeah. The production design by Jack Fisk. Jack Fisk has been the man for production design for a long, long time. Ever since, like, you know, I'm thinking like Badlands and Carrie, and, you know,
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, everything I think is great. So
yeah, it's firing on all engines. I give this an A+. It is just stunning, a stunning achievement, I think.
Let's go ahead and move on to the segment that we had planned for this episode. Basically, the idea is we're going to play Video Store Clerk. The name of the game is If You Like, Then You'll Like. We're going to pretend as though somebody comes to us with, you know, perhaps somebody younger, a little less seasoned in horror in general. And they say, you know, if I like blank, what would you recommend? So we'll start with you. I gave you 2 recommendations to, or 2 movies to find recommendations for. What was your first one?
The first one you gave me was, I'll go with Get Out first.
Okay.
Yeah, so you give me Get Out as a challenge of, if somebody's into Get Out, what else would they be interested in? I mean, you know, there's sort of obvious answers, I feel like, with something like Candyman or Stepford Wives. But I wanted to try to avoid that. So I had a couple of picks.
Okay.
My first one, I think my main pick is The Guest, which we reviewed I don't know, a while back, directed by Adam Wingard, starring Dan Stevens.
Okay.
And the reason I would recommend The Guest is it's sort of soft horror. Like Get Out is very conceptual. It's this idea of this sort of suburban horror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, um, in Get Out, it is this guy who's going to meet his family for the first time, and there's sort of this sinister secret that he doesn't know about. In The Guest, it's kind of the inverse of that, where this sort of mysterious acquaintance comes and ingratiates himself with this family, but there's a sinister secret that he has. I also think it's very stylish, and Get Out is kind of a horror comedy. There's a lot of humor in it. I feel like similarly with The Guest.
Yeah, they came out kind of around the same time. I think The Guest was 2014, I want to say. Get Out was, 2016, 2017?
I think it was 2017.
Yeah, it could be. Could have been.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I'd say The Guest is kind of underseen compared to other Adam Wingard movies and compared to a lot of the movies, like indie horror that was coming out around that time. It was sort of that ramp up to Get Out and the A24 explosion. But it's good. There's also like a hefty amount of like action in the movie too. I'd say it's just as much an action movie as it is a horror film. So they're both sort of genre hybrids of sorts.
It's got tension without necessarily being scary. And I feel similarly to the movie Get Out. And then I had a second recommendation of something that's maybe a little scarier, something that is a little more horror. And I only just now realized it's the same director. But the other recommendation I would have for someone interested in Get Out is You're Next. It story-wise is maybe a little more along the lines of Get Out. It's, someone coming to meet this family, and then this sort of dark situation unfolds around them. I literally did not realize they were both Adam Wingard until right now.
Yeah, Adam Wingard was that was his bigger movie, I would say, of the two. The Guest was technically his follow-up, but again, kind of underseen.
And I think that's why I would recommend The Guest first, is because I feel like that's less likely to sort of come up on a Google search. Whereas You're Next, I feel like the comparisons are a little easier to see.
Right.
But I think, neither of these movies have the sort of racial politics of Get Out. And I do think that's significant. But again, I was just kind of trying to think outside the box a little bit.
Okay. All right. One of the ones that you gave me to look up is The Conjuring, which is, blossomed into a whole movie universe now. But I'm going to go with something sort of in the same genre, but didn't get as much love as The Conjuring. So my pick for that was the movie Oculus, which came out in 2013, I believe. This was early Mike Flanagan. This is before he started doing his shows on Netflix. This is before his bigger movies. And this is, definitely of the sort of the haunted house persuasion and the supernatural horror whereas in The Conjuring, you have Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are like demonologists who come in to clear a house. In this movie, you have a brother and sister character who were tormented by something evil as when they were younger, and as adults come back to the place to kill it, to take care of it once and for all. And it kind of goes in a little bit deeper as to like sort of like the family trauma that this evil represents. And there is even some sort of like question as to, was there actually anything paranormal happening, or was it their way of rationalizing a fucked up family situation?
Mm-hmm.
But you have Karen Gillan in here.
I actually have not seen Oculus. I have been recommended it a few times, and I am a Mike Flanagan fan, so I should definitely check it out. I thought The Conjuring would be an interesting challenge because it was so popular, because it was so big, and because it spawned so many sort of, I don't even want to say knockoffs, because a lot of them are sort of within that same universe, the Ed and Lorraine Warren verse.
Right.
That I thought it might be challenging to find something outside of that box. But yeah, Oculus is one that has been on my list for a while. I should definitely check it out.
Yeah, so, I tried to think of maybe something more directly comparable. Like, obviously, the antecedents of The Conjuring is, like, The Poltergeist, and The Shining, and, technically it's a prequel to Amityville Horror.
Yeah.
But rather than going that route with the 70s and 80s, also there's a decent amount of Exorcist in there as well. But rather than just going that route and something a little more obvious, I feel like, kind of like The Guest, Oculus was sort of underpraised, underseen at the time. In fact, I think it kind of got shit on a little bit when it came out. Like, people didn't quite get it. But I feel like if it came out now, now that Blumhouse is a much bigger thing.
Also, with Mike Flanagan's increasing popularity with his Netflix shows, it would not surprise me if a lot of his work gets sort of a reappraisal within the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But this is a good one.
Cool.
I really like the mechanics of it. It's not the scariest thing in the world. I think probably The Conjuring is a scarier movie if you're just looking for, jump scares and fear and that kind of, and dread. I feel like this movie has a bit more of a, there's a hero story there because they're going to take down this thing.
I feel like that's kind of Mike Flanagan, though, right? Like, I think he can, and I don't want to discount him. He can absolutely deliver scares. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I appreciate about him as an artist is it's never scare first. It's always sort of like, how can I scare you with these elements? How can I build this into a scare? It's never just about making people jump out of their seats.
Right. It's always story forward. And he's obviously very influenced by Stephen King. And I think this movie in particular was sort of a reworking of his original adaptation he planned on doing for 1408. And then he wasn't able to do it. And the movie came out on its own. And so he kind of retooled it to be Oculus. But there's other elements, like you can see some elements of that in there. And but yeah, I would say people who are a fan of supernatural horror of the last, of the Blumhouse variety, should check out Oculus.
Cool. The other challenge you gave me was Hostel, which I thought was particularly interesting because I hate that movie. I am not a fan of Hostel. I even Eli Roth's work, I think it is his most derivative and his most base.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily dislike Eli Roth, but I do dislike Hostel. So it was hard for me to think of like, what is a movie that's like Hostel that I could, in good conscience, recommend? Because literally Hostel is one of the movies that kind of turned me off of horror in the early 2000s. It was sort of the start of the air quotes torture porn phase of movies, between that and Saw, which relied heavily on sort of showcasing this kind of, depraved what the fuck gore effect. So I was trying to think of, again, what's a less obvious movie that isn't directly related or directly descendant of Hostel. And the movie I came up with, I have a couple recommendations. My main recommendation is called Would You Rather? This is
you know what? I never saw that, but I remember it coming out.
Okay, so I watched this on a whim, probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Because at the time I was very into the podcast Comedy Bang Bang, and they do a segment called Would You Rather, and it is kind of a fun improv game that you can play with people. And Ashley found this movie called Would You Rather, and at the time it was like, well, we have to watch this. Now, I don't think this is a great movie. It's not. I don't think it's on the same caliber of The Guest or You're Next, but it's a lot of fun. And it I think kind of approaches similar thematic elements to Hostel in a less gross way, in a way that is more palatable. It's sort of campy. Like, I think this movie could become a cult classic kind of thing if it finds its audience.
I think it kind of has.
Has it? Okay.
I hear about it every now and then. Not often, but every once in a while it comes up.
I mean, it's starring Brittany Snow, who has a bit more of a career, but still in the horror genre with stuff like X. Jeffrey Combs, who is a longtime Stuart Gordon collaborator. Sasha Grey, famous porn star from around the time that this movie was, came out. So it has sort of that cult classic recipe. It has similar themes of classism and sort of like what money can buy you that Hostel has, but with, I think, a less ugly approach. It's a little sillier. It has a little more fun with it. And it's just a little more watchable. I mean, I just think Hostel is sort of a miserable experience, but I think if you enjoy Hostel, there is stuff that you would enjoy out of this. It has similar elements to Saw, and just this idea of you're put in this sort of unwinnable situation, and there's ludicrous violence that occurs because of it. I think it's a fun time. It's not brilliant. It's not going to change anybody's life, but I would rather watch Would You Rather than Hostel.
All right, cool. The last one you gave me was the Blair Witch Project. Now, I thought you gave this to me because I recently tweeted something out, and this is kind of the direction I decided to take it. I said that, for all the praise that the Blair Witch Project gets for its innovations in the found footage genre, which is undeniable, nobody really talks about it as being sort of proto-mumblecore, because it's all there. Like, it's
low budget. There's a lot of improvisation.
I mean,
there's
almost
a lot of
all the dialogue is improvised. The actors are kind of given a loose outline of what's supposed to happen per scene, but they sort of get to, there's an interaction with the crew that's very natural. So I went more forward into mumblecore proper, with the Duplass brothers. I want to say it's their second feature, Baghead, which is sort of a horror comedy that they put out, starring Steve Zissou, who was in their television show. If you remember that one, the one with Melanie Linsky, I forget the name of it now.
Oh, yes. He also was in something I saw very recently. I can't remember what it was. He was in the Haunted Mansion remake as a very brief thing, but he's so good in Togetherness on HBO that I would love to see him in more stuff.
And a very, very young Greta Gerwig when she was getting her start.
Okay.
This is about a group of friends, filmmakers, who they are jealous because one of their peers has a film premiere at a small festival, and he was able to get his thing made. And so they decide, okay, let's get it together. We're going to go off to this cabin in the woods. We're going to brainstorm and try and think of something fun that we can do together. We're not going to leave until we have an idea. And at which point they start seeing a home invader with a bag mask, a paper bag over his head. And they're not sure if one of them is playing a prank or not. And their paranoia starts to build up, and it kind of plays both angles as the typical sort of mumblecore love triangle complication story, and then also this home invasion thriller that may or may not be occurring, or may just be a manifestation of their jealousies and their issues.
You've sold me. That also kind of reminds me of the movie we reviewed. I don't remember what year, but it Scare Me.
A little bit like
idea
that.
Of what's real and what's not, and how far is this going to go in this sort of isolated element. No, I'm very interested in this now.
Yeah, it's funny. It's certainly not as scary as Blair Witch is trying to be, although I think however many years later, 25 years later, Blair Witch is really not all that scary anymore. It's more of a novelty now if you're looking at it with fresh eyes.
Well, I recently saw Blair Witch Project for the first time, and I was actually pretty impressed with how, it's definitely a mood piece.
The world building is totally strong.
Yeah, and it's not jump scare heavy, but it does create this sense of dread that I feel like not a lot of horror movies can pull off.
Right, and you also have to put your perspective into 1989. A lot of people didn't know if it was real or not because they had never seen a found footage film before.
Half of the movie was the marketing of that movie.
Right. And, the weird aspect ratio and all of that stuff going into it. But if you kind of take that movie and then play it a bit more for the interpersonal dynamics of the group, which Blair Witch does a lot of, too. Like I said.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
that movie's like this close to just being a mumblecore film.
You're not wrong. I mean, I did see you tweet that, but that was not why I recommended this movie for you. But yes, I mean, you're right. Like, it's all about... Because there is this sort of supernatural horror element, but most of the movie is about how these relationships break down once they're in a situation that's sort of out their control.
Right. And, Baghead would sort of ramp up to more overtly horror adjacent mumblecore films like Creep and the early Ty West stuff, and even Adam Wingard coming out of that group, going on to making their movies like the VHS films and stuff like that.
I was going to say, have you seen Creep? Have we talked about Creep?
We saw the first one for the podcast, yeah, a while ago. Still haven't seen part 2, which maybe I'll do that this weekend.
Oh, you should do it. Not to say too much about it, but I think it is consistent with the first one. If you liked the first one, I think you'll like Creep too.
Right.
It I think it has an interesting twist and take that sets up a similar situation, but with a whole new sort of spin on it.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and finish up with our review of One Cut of the Dead, and I will let you sum that up.
Okay, this one's going to be a little tricky to set up because I don't... Before we get into this review, before I even get up into the setup, I think this is the type of movie that the less you know about it, going into it, the better.
True.
So, yeah, because there are some twists, there are some turns, but essentially, this is about the making of a movie, of a zombie movie.
A low-budget Japanese production.
Yeah. Wherein an actual zombie attack takes place during the production. And then we get sort of a behind-the-scenes look of that production.
Yes.
I mean...
There's absolutely no way to talk about this movie without giving away the big reveal.
Yeah.
So
if you have not seen One Cut of the Dead, I do highly recommend going into it as cold as possible.
I recommend that as well. Yes.
Yeah. So pause this, go watch it, come back, listen to the rest of our review.
It's 90 minutes. You can get through it really easy.
And it's a fun watch. Like it is.
It's on Shudder. I believe it's a Shudder original, which means it's probably on one of the Prime channels as well, if you have that. But
I don't think it was originally produced by Shudder. I think
I think they bought the rights. Yeah.
Yeah.
The American rights, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to get into it.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've got that out of the way, I will set it up for real. I mean, sort of the first act of this movie is the presentation of this movie where they're making a movie and an actual zombie attack happens while they are making the movie.
Right.
And then we peel away the layer to see that this was a production of a movie of them making a zombie movie where a zombie attack happens during the movie. And that's kind of when the real movie starts.
Right. So I had a funny experience watching this movie because
I also did.
I started it on Shudder and I was watching it, and watching the first third of it, it's super grainy, super low budget. The gimmick is all one cut, right? So we talked about Scorsese's long takes. This is all one long take, in sort of that Birdman rope kind of style.
The acting isn't the best. There's some moments when you're like, what the fuck is happening? Okay, all right, I guess it's all one take, so sure, right. It's this low-budget zombie thing.
Yeah, so I was watching it, and I'm about 15 minutes in, and I'm like, I don't know if this is doing much for me. Like,
I did the same
good
thing.
For them for getting a thing made, but I feel like I'm sort of done with this already, and this didn't need to be 90 minutes. It feels like a college project. Like,
yeah,
it's kind of screechy and annoying. And at this point in my life, do I really need to see somebody's shitty zombie movie?
Well, and there's so many like scenes of like these sort of extended attack scenes that aren't shot super well, and you're like, I get it, this is one take, but like, and I get that this is low budget and there's, small cast.
Yeah.
But like, really, why do so many people talk so well about this movie?
Well, I didn't even know so many. All I knew was Ted, and I was feeling bad, almost like I'm gonna have to shit on this, and like we don't get recommendations very often.
Like, I get it, but I don't get it.
Yeah, there's something kind of novel about it, but it's not good. And
it kind of felt
I don't
like
need
watching,
this.
If anyone's familiar, it kind of felt like watching like sort of early Trauma stuff. Like there's some stuff that's like, is this funny because it's intentional, or is this funny because it's like done poorly?
Right. And then when the 36-minute line cuts and we start seeing credits, I'm like, it's over already? And then I look and like, no, there's still an hour. Like, what the hell else are they going to do? And then it peels away that layer where now we're showing, it says like, a month prior, and we see them casting.
We see the actual movie is about the making of the movie that we just watched.
Right. So it's this fun kind of genre exercise where they sort of deconstruct this one take zombie film, and all of the things that you were thinking, oh, that wasn't done very well, or like, why are they doing that, or this isn't as funny as they think it is, and like all of my criticisms were addressed in the second half of the film when you see the making of the movie within the movie.
The movie is about the making of this movie. Right. And I literally, there was a moment where I literally just was like, damn it, they got my ass.
Yeah, they totally did. Yeah. And there's actually some like charming stuff in here. There's a father-daughter story that sneaks up on you.
Well, there's a point where once you see the movie, and then they introduce you to the story behind the movie, that's when you get the real movie, and there's these character interactions and dynamics, and like there's an immediacy to it. Yeah. Whereas the beginning, you're like, okay, I kind of guess, sure, I get it's very gimmicky, but I guess. But then you get multiple cuts, you get multiple angles, you get coverage, you get actual dialogue, you get characters that are actually sort of, well written and developed, and you see how, like, you see the ramp up to this final product, and then they show you the filming of that product from angles that you didn't see before, but there's these character dynamics that you weren't aware of that.
There's only a couple movies I can think of that kind of do something similar. I mean, not with the same conceit, but with that same idea of like, this part doesn't make sense now, but it will later. And it's usually done through time travel, like low budget time travel. So I believe there was some stuff like that in the movie Primer. And then there was also that movie Time Crimes.
Because this story does play with time in a way. It's like you see the product and then you see the making of the product. You see the behind the scenes after the thing that you just saw. And I also appreciate, like, they present it in a way that you see the perspective of the people who paid for the thing as well. And
because part of this
is supposed to be.
It's supposed to be a live broadcast, so they can't cut. Once they start rolling, whatever they get, they get. So if somebody, one of the actors is drunk and can't get on his mark on time or whatever, it'll show, outside of the perspective of the film, it'll show grips and stuff holding cue cards saying, just keep going, improvise.
Yeah, there's an element of this that feels more stage production than movie production, because typically in a movie you have the you have the ability to cut, you have the ability to edit. In this case, it's a live production, so it's similar to a theatrical production, where there's stage managers and there's people trying to sort of coordinate and cover and make it work, even if it's not what all the rehearsals indicated or what the script indicates. The final product is the thing that you're seeing live.
Right. And Birdman did do a little bit of that, although I wasn't like as concerned with that ultimately. But yeah, I mean, I think by and large it's kind of just a genre exercise, but a really fun one. And I really liked the puzzle box nature of it. And I thought that it was pretty clever. And once you understand why they're doing the things they're doing, it's actually pretty funny.
Oh, I agree. At the beginning, it was like, I get this is kind of a comedy, but I just don't know if all the jokes are landing. But once that veil is lifted, once you realize what the movie is, I was like, oh, this is a real movie. And the jokes, you're not meant to get them for another 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is just
kind of risky.
Structurally very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the type of thing that I could see doing really well at a festival. Because the way it kind of plays around with your expectations.
I could see, but also on a streaming network, I think this is a little harder because you really have to stick with it for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
You really have to go through that initial journey. And then once the lens widens and you're opened up to what the world actually is, it's so fun and rich. And there's so many jokes that you didn't get for the last half hour.
Right. And which is why I think it's probably smart for them to go with Shudder, because I feel like a genre audience, specifically a horror audience, is going to be more patient when the movie is purposely not good. Usually your gorehounds and stuff, they're going to just sit through it and just to say they've seen it.
Sure.
Whereas if this were on Hulu or something, you'd probably get a lot more people just being like, well, this is dumb, and change it after 10 minutes.
Yeah, and it really rewards. You really have to see the whole thing. Like, that's what I think is cool about it is I feel like everybody who's seen this movie probably had a similar experience of like, what the fuck are we kind of watching here?
Right.
And then, as soon as the camera pulls out and you see this is a real movie, there's sort of a relief to that.
Right. And all of the actors, not for nothing, even though they're in service of something that's sort of mechanical in premise, they have to give like 3 performances in one, because they have to play the real world version of themselves. They have to play
the actor playing the script.
Yeah, exactly. They have to play the actor struggling to do the movie, and then they have to play the character that they were hired to be in this fake movie.
The guy who plays the actual director, I think, in particular, delivers a very charming, warm performance. I mean, everybody does. Everybody sort of has to be game with the concept. But he sort of glues it all together.
Yeah, and this was directed by Shinichirô Ueda. But you get a lot of fun personalities in here. You get one guy who's a preening movie star who wants to change the script, and everyone's telling him, this is live, we can't change the script. And then you have a pop star who's trying to do her best in being in a zombie movie. And
you have an aging actor who's also an alcoholic.
Right.
And then the director who sort of has to fill these extra roles as they, as situations present themselves, and his wife, who sort of also has to fill in, and their daughter, who also was, there's a lot of fun character dynamics here that, again, like you said, I went on a journey with this movie. For the first half hour, I was kind of taking it for granted and was like, I don't know if I'm going to get much out of this. Right. And then there is such a more rich story and a lot more comedy than you realize.
Right. Yeah. So that is the episode. And if anybody has anything to say about any of the things we talked about in this episode or previous, you can message us on social media at Twitter and Instagram, or you can email us at MacGuffinPod@gmail.com. We're searchable on most social media under MacGuffinPod. We also have a YouTube channel where the video version of the podcast is uploaded usually within a few days before or after the audio podcast. You can find us under MacGuffin Pod. There's 3 different MacGuffin podcasts. YouTube right now, but we're just MacGuffin Pod. You'll see our videos in the thumbnail, or our faces in the thumbnails. And you want to follow us on Letterboxd, we're on there as well. And be sure to leave us a star rating and a 1-sentence review on whatever podcast app you use to listen to the show. iTunes or Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever. Good Pods. I know some people like to use that. And you can follow me individually at VC Cassidy on Twitter and Instagram. I also started my own Letterboxd because there's certain things I couldn't do on the podcast Letterboxd that I wanted to be a little bit more interactive with. So I just started logging what I'm watching there. Also linking back to my reviews that I write for the Idaho State Journal. So you can find that at Idaho State Journal Arts and Entertainment or Idaho State Journal Movie Reviews. And you'll see the review archives. And be sure to read the reviews and articles by the rest of the MacGuffin staff at mcguff.in.
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Keith Foster Kid. I guess I'm also on Letterboxd. I don't really think about that one as much. And if you would like to see me perform live comedy, come check out a show at mockingbirdimprov.com. org. I am a part of the shows Lyrics and Laugh and Improv versus Stand Up.
Great. And everybody have a happy Halloween.
Can you find the wolves in this picture?
Bye.